Hi everyone, my name is Harshdeep. I'm the director of CLAIR Voices, and today we have Ashley Fisher as our speaker. Eunice and Giselle, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Eunice Choi. I am a member of CLAIR Voices and I am from Fresno, California, and I will be one of the interviewers today.
Hi, I'm Giselle. I'm a member of CLAIR Voices as well, and I'm from Westchester, New York.
So CLAIR Voices is a subgroup from Project CLAIR, with Project CLAIR focusing on providing free and personalized English lessons through a tutor-to-T system. Meanwhile, CLAIR Voices focuses on highlighting immigrant and refugee obstacles and challenges. And with that being said, we have our speaker Ashley Fisher here today, where she will discuss resettlement housing with regard to refugees and immigrants.
Sure. So my name is Ashley Fisher. I work for World Relief Seattle, which is a resettlement agency along with a few other things that we do. And I have been working there for almost around 3 years. I originally started in housing as the housing coordinator on the resettlement team, and then recently in February of this year transitioned to resettlement coordinator. Yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Great. Well, I'll get started on the first questions. So, how did you first become involved with World Relief Seattle?
I graduated college in 2018, and I had grown up in the Seattle area, but went to California for college, and then was moving back and trying to look for organizations that were doing work within the community. I didn't have like anything super specific, just knew I wanted it to be like social justice oriented, something working with people for different causes that I really cared about, and just kind of stumbled upon World Relief as one of the organizations that was doing really important work in the community. And I don't know, something I really appreciated too is it seemed like, from my outsider's perspective, just doing research on it, that it was really driven by and ran by the people that they were wanting to support. And so a lot of like the leadership team had refugee or immigrant backgrounds. The manager for the position that I was applying for was under someone that was an asylee. And so something that was really important to me was having it, if you're going to do important work, making sure that like those voices are represented in leadership. And so they had a few positions and I just applied and ended up, like I said earlier, got into housing and just kind of started from there.
Wow, that's really great. From your time at World Relief Seattle, is there a certain refugee case you remember that has really stuck with you?
Yeah, I feel like there's always like a handful, and especially working in housing for over 2 years of just really getting to work with clients, or RFS refers to them as participants. Right from the moment when they arrive, housing is normally one of the like key factors or key issues that people are very concerned about when they first get here. And so just getting to be a part of that, I have like multiple families that I felt like I did very like minimal things for them, of like I was there when they moved in and helped them, but for those cases, like moving into their first apartment in the US is like such a big, huge moment, and one that they are going to remember. And so I have like multiple families or sometimes individuals that I've like worked with that it'll be funny. I'll go to like drop some things off after they've been in their apartment for a little bit, and just wanting to have you sit down for like tea or coffee. And something I really appreciated was my manager, especially like working with people working in refugee resettlement. Can be really busy sometimes, and so it can be easy to kind of have it be like, hey, like goodbye, here you go, like I gotta leave. But my manager really pressed like it's okay for you guys to sit and to have like a moment with a case. So like if they invite you for tea, to sit down. And yeah, just some really like sweet memories of having normally tea with the parents and sometimes like just children running around, or just really getting to hear about different people's perspectives. Or one time I was working with a family and I had interacted with them a few times and just heard about some of the like really cool experiences of this family had come from Afghanistan, and just different work that they had done with the US government, and just some really crazy stories. And the wife was so sweet. She was asking me like, can I take a picture with you? Like, we just want to like remember you. So different things like that too, where you're just getting to really get to know the families, even if it's just for like the first few weeks that they're here.
Yeah, that's really great that you get to make such strong connections with them.
Yeah.
On that note, could you describe the steps taken on the complex journey to rehome refugees into permanent and stable lifestyles?
Yeah. So how our office handles it, I kind of work on both ends of like before a family gets here, and then I've worked with families once they have arrived. Our office will receive information that a case has been booked. Ahead of time, we've been contacting any family that they've had in the area, what we refer to as US ties. And so we'll normally have already contacted them. It could have been a few weeks, or it could have been a few months or a year since we've been in contact with them, and just letting them know that, like, hey, we got flight information, your family is scheduled to arrive on this date. And then kind of just seeing how involved a family member wants to be. Sometimes cases have really strong US ties that they've had lots of family members already come, and so they're like, yeah, like we've got this down, like this is what we do. Or sometimes cases, they do have family here, but they're just not as close, and so it's going to be a little bit more hands off. And so with situations like that, just depending, finding out if family is going to pick them up from the airport or not. If not, like the caseworker will be there to do it. And then just coordinating hey, are you wanting your family to stay with you? Because some people, it's like, yeah, it's been years since I've seen my brother. Like, of course they're gonna stay with me. Like, of course I want to have, like, we're gonna have this big, like celebration. And or some of them are like, yeah, it's just a friend that I don't really know that well. And so coordinating where they're going to be staying for their first night, and after that, whether that's with relatives at what we have as called as host homes. So that is volunteers who have been vetted and trained through our outreach team, and they have either like a spare bedroom or an empty basement, or sometimes we've had really cool opportunities where they have like a whole Airbnb that they're wanting to allow families when they first arrive to stay in for. Sometimes that's just a few nights, or it can be a few weeks, depending on housing. And then from there, the caseworkers are just involved in doing home visits, making sure the family is connected to benefits, getting the family, like with housing, into their first apartment. So it ranges from anything of like Social Security appointments to doctors and dentist appointments, getting children enrolled in school. Yeah, just a wide variety of things that it's easy to take for granted, but are really, really important, especially when someone first gets here.
Thank you. I really believe that your work is inspirational and encouraging.
Oh, thank you.
And I guess just adding on to that, like what other factors or conditions do you consider when you're housing refugees to accommodate their needs?
Yeah, so I recently, having switched from housing into the resettlement coordinator position, we have since hired a new housing coordinator. And so it's been interesting to talk through all of the processes that I've just learned over the years of never go into a situation of like, oh, I've worked with a lot of cases from this country, and therefore they're going to act this way, or they're going to do this. Of like, every single human being is different and is going to respond in different ways. And so sometimes cases are wanting to live in this specific area, or just because like a family member moved here doesn't mean they're going to want that same thing. And so being flexible with that, being understanding when plans change, especially with housing, and also understanding if people are responding in ways that might not fully make sense to you. One of my coworkers, when I was early on, did a really good job of reminding me when it was like something happened that I was like, this just doesn't logically, like, why would someone do this? And she very kindly was like, hey, like, that can actually be like a trauma response. And remembering that just because someone isn't presenting their trauma in the way that you might, or in a way that you would assume, doesn't mean that it's not there, and doesn't mean that they're not responding to that. And so in everything that you're doing, while still holding people to, you're a part of a program, and that program has guidelines and rules, and sometimes like we need you to follow these, and sometimes there are exceptions to that, but also still being firm in those things, while also being understanding that someone might forget an appointment because they don't realize that they are really, because of stress, they have like slight memory loss of like, you might have just talked to them like, hey, tomorrow at 3, they totally forget. Or you talk through something and everything's like good to go. And then the next day they're like, no, actually, I'm not okay with that. And so just being mindful of those factors. Another thing too is a lot of the programs that we're working within, some of them are super great, but sometimes have specific requirements that makes it in a way that automatically boxes certain people out. And so just running up against barriers and walls where you're trying to help individuals, but because there's a particular case or something's happening, the program that was built to support them sometimes doesn't do that and sometimes fails people. And so just really seeing, especially with COVID, really seeing those flaws within a system, and recognizing that sometimes, especially with like government programs, just because something was created in a way by individuals doesn't mean that it's the best thing for the people that it's serving. And a lot of times that's because the people that created the programs are not actually from the communities in which it's impacting. And so just really seeing that firsthand and doing what you can or try to find another alternative or another solution. And so, yeah, those are just some of the ways I see it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I love how you recognize all like the barriers that are present and like you find ways to address them.
In accordance with your work, does World Relief Seattle also help adjusting refugees obtain jobs and work?
Yeah, so I'm on the resettlement team, which in it's its own separate team with like a housing coordinator, resettlement coordinator, caseworkers, and kind of separate, but a part of that is our employment team. So we have right now 4, soon to be 5, like employment specialists that are experts in a few state programs, but then also federal programs that we have at our office to help employ people. And so that is not only the new arrivals that we're working with on the resettlement team, but also people that can come back on a state program and say, hey, I'm working this job, but I want to move to like this career path. And so anything from creating a resume, going to an interview, we have job class that was in person and now is over Zoom for the past 1.5 years or so. So really focusing on that. We do have, like I mentioned, a federally funded employment program that a lot of our newer arrivals are a part of that provides rental assistance while also having really strict guidelines about seeking employment. And so that would also be where our employment specialists are working with cases. So the different programs that we have are very employment focused and oriented, which is really great. But in and of itself, there are challenges of people sometimes come here and they want to pursue education, and employment isn't always like the top thing on their mind. And just the way in which even just resettlement or reception and placement, so the RNP program, which is the overarching like resettlement program in the US, it is very geared towards getting a job when you first get here, which is understandable too, but then you're working with people who might have thought that's what they wanted, and then they get here and then they think they want something else. And so trying to be respectful of where people are at, allowing them to process things, while also, like I was saying earlier, working within the constraints of programs that have certain requirements, and one of those being, we need to get you a job within this time frame. And again, that also is to having like realistic conversations with people of like, hey, your program's going to be ending in this time. You're living in this apartment, like what's your plan for paying rent like once this program is done? Like let's have like that hard conversation of like, so we need to start looking for a job so that you can save up money so that you can pay rent and pay for these other things. So yeah.
Thank you.
So to elaborate more on your experience being on the resettlement team, what would you say is the greatest challenge that refugee and asylee face when resettling and integrating into new communities?
Yeah, I've kind of said this earlier, but I think it's multiple things, from coming to a new country where you might not always speak the same language or understand the way the culture is structured or how certain things work. while also being placed within programs that are holding you to those same standards. And so just working within those barriers too, of also having, and I think our office has done a really good job of finding like landlords that really understand the work that World Relief's doing, or finding employers that have worked a lot with our employment team at World Relief. And so really understanding of the participants that we're that we're working with. But I don't know, you just always hear about situations where someone went to a appointment or went to a specific, especially with like landlords, of situations where like you should have been providing interpretation. You should have been more understanding or courteous of someone, and just where you can tell someone felt silenced or talked over because someone just didn't take the time to walk through something with them or try to get an interpreter on the phone. And so I think just facing those cultural challenges, while also running into factors, like I was saying earlier, of the way that systems are built aren't always the best thing for an individual. And so having to run up against those issues while also on a really short timeline of anywhere, the longest for like new arrivals is like a 6-month program, but the common one is like for 3 months. And so we're trying to work with all of that, be in a new country, possibly learn a new language, and go to all these appointments while also trying to find a job within this short time frame. So it's a lot to process up front.
Yeah, that's really great that you're able to accommodate immigrants and refugees from various backgrounds. How would you describe like the unique challenges that refugee and immigrant kids experience?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So it is always interesting because like for all the adults that we're working with, we have ESL classes at our office, which is now online currently, or different state programs that attending ESL classes like at a community college is a requirement. But for kids, that's something that I think they don't really attend, because also with children's brains, it's easier they're still developing, so it can be a little bit easier to pick up languages. But like those children are normally they arrive, and then within the first month they're enrolled in school if it's not the summer, and they go straight to class. And that can be a really great experience, or it can be really challenging of just being so overwhelmed, not only with having to leave all of your friends and family behind, and now you're thrown into this new space where you might not understand what's going on around you. You don't for anyone, no matter where you're coming from, moving to a new school as a kid and having to make new friends is just terrifying. And so then already having all of this transition going on in your home life, and then having that happen in school. And then maybe you're going to a school where there isn't anyone from the same country as you. So there's no place to connect in that way. And so feeling like no one really understands. Something that's really cool that I so love about World Relief is we actually have a next gen program, which really focuses on making sure that either recently arrived or families that have been here for a while, so that refugee youth feels really connected. So currently right now, we're just about to start our refugee kids summer camp. I know, especially with this past year of a lot of schools still being online, that was a huge challenge that our families were facing of one, I just think every single kid in America was struggling with having classes be over Zoom, but then having, maybe you just got here, and so getting internet set up right away. And then maybe your parent doesn't know how to connect to Zoom, and so you're missing class because you're 6 and you don't know how to do that either. So just working with those challenges. And I would say all of the participants that we work with are so resilient, but it also is really cool to see too of a family that's been here for maybe 3 to 6 months, and the kid that didn't really speak any English just walks in and just starts chatting with you because they've kind of just picked it up being in school. So it's really cool to see, but also recognizing that sometimes just because we're working mostly with adults of the struggles that they're facing and working on getting them employed, also focusing on the children too. And that's again why I really appreciate that World Relief has that next gen program to really focus in on making sure that kids feel connected at home, but also connected at school, and have a place where they're able to come together in community with people that have similar life experience to them.
It's really great that you're able to create such a safe and welcoming community for children. Adding on to that, so World Relief's Seattle's initial resettlement services include like providing orientation on various topics to life in the US. So I'm just curious what type of topics that includes.
Yeah, great question. So that's something that's like a very firm requirement within our contract in order to resettle refugees is having what we refer to as cultural orientation. So this used to be something that happened in a classroom every Friday that people would attend. Now it has been over Zoom, so it kind of happens a few times throughout the week. So that entails anything from the services that World Relief is going to provide, refugee status, something that's called a travel loan. So through IOM, who books refugees like flights to come to the US, there's a small travel loan that the family is given where there's no interest on it, but it's there to help the family build credit in the US. And so just getting information on when that starts and when to start paying that back. Education, public transportation, things from like when to call 911. So there's something called a cultural orientation assessment that after they've attended what I believe is 5 to 6 classes of this that cover a variety of topics each time, they're given a exam just to make sure that and how the way that we're presenting information is coming across. And so there's questions, anything from like you have a cough. Do you go to the emergency room? Do you call 911 or do you make an appointment with your doctor? So different things like that, or budgeting and finance of just how to set up a bank account, how to save money in the US. Especially the idea of credit or credit cards is something that can be very foreign to people when they get here. And so just explaining how that process works. How to communicate with your landlord when you have issues at your apartment, what to do. So a wide variety of things that are super important to cover right when a family gets here.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
In society, do refugees often experience discriminatory behavior for a variety of reasons?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, luckily that doesn't always happen, but that is something that you do run up against in this work. And especially, I started in September of 2018. So it was in the midst of a presidential administration that was not really supportive of the work that we were doing. And so just kind of facing it on a larger scale of like the programs that were there to support refugees were slowly being taken away. Well, also then when you have leadership of a country that is supporting negative thought and speech towards specific groups of people, then the rest of the public is going to think that that's okay. And not that that is every single person that we interact with, that is not the case. But I think just anywhere from I've heard of a situation of a child was bullied at school because their English wasn't the best. And so navigating that, or hearing cases of our employment specialist having to really sit down and communicate with new employers that haven't worked with World Relief before, of specific things of well, no, they're here, they have documentation, and yes, even though this is different than the average person that you've employed before, this paper proves that they're allowed to work. And so sometimes I don't really think it's fully discrimination and more of just ignorance. But I think sometimes people just feel so uncomfortable when they don't understand something that they do things unintentionally in a hurtful way. So as housing coordinator, attending quite a few lease signings in the past, of having an interpreter there and walking through and explaining things to a family. And I'm not the one that's signing this lease, this is for this family, and having the landlord talk directly to me. And then really facing that too when you're working with, we have a wide variety of refugees. Some of them are from different parts of Eastern Europe, and some of them are from different countries in Africa. And so especially seeing that, unfortunately, with situations where I was are you talking to me because I'm the only white person in the room, and why I'm not the one that's signing this paper, and we need to direct that over. And so I think calling that out when you see it, when you're in that position of leadership, but also empowering our participants for situations where like you are allowed to ask for an interpreter, you are allowed to like hold your ground in that. So yeah, it's always so heartbreaking when you run up against that. And I think too the work that World Relief, especially on our outreach side, is really pushing towards is just more of an understanding, because like I said, I think a lot of it is just from ignorance of educating the public of what it means to be a refugee and what people have gone through to get here, but also like recognizing these are people that are a part of your community, and loving and supporting them on their resettlement journey.
It is unfortunate, and I hope that we could encourage more open-mindedness in more amounts of people in the future.
So you've talked about like various aspects of this already, but how does World Relief Seattle create a sustainable life and community for immigrants and refugees through your various services and 5-pillar approach?
Yeah. So with like working with people that just got here, it's a very quick turnaround of making sure that someone has a job, that people are attending appointments, that they have stable housing, and making sure that the housing is something that is affordable for them once they're off of our program. Someone will sign a lease and be like, yeah, that sounds great, when they know that like a different program is providing them rent for a specific amount of time, but then that can get really overwhelming when it's all of a sudden that price tag that's on your rent amount every month is something that you're having to now pay for. And so making sure that with wanting to get people into things right away, that also we're setting them up for success of explaining how to do something, not just doing it on their own, or talking through rent and making sure that we're moving them into a place that they can afford on their own. But something that's really cool about World Relief is the team I'm on only works with people for a certain amount of time. But just because their time on that program ends doesn't mean that we don't have other services to help them. And so we have 2 different ones that are called preferred communities, or prime, that are more of like extended case management. So anything from really difficult cases of like different medical issues or family dynamics that like a separation or something, there's extended case management for that. Or if it's something like they need help applying for SSI, or something that's a little bit like they still need some case management support, but not as hands-on. So even though their resettlement time might end, there's still other programs there. And then, like I've mentioned, we do have kind of a holistic approach of having a next gen program. We have a community garden, which is super cool, of garden plots that are in a parking lot of a church that's partnered with our office, where people are able to have their own plot and grow different foods that they might have in their home country, or they just want to try growing. And so something that, especially if you've moved from a more rural setting into a very suburban aspect of living more in a city and not having like that open space where you can just garden, of having a space where that's something they can do, but also an area to connect with people and grow in community. I really think I know a lot of the programs at World Relief are more driven towards creating spaces for engagement and community growing, because something that can just be so isolating to people is they move here and they have their own space and they might have 1 or 2 friends, but they can't really find new friends, or say like a mom that is home with the kids all day while the dad goes to work, and just always just feeling really isolated, and especially adding another level of not having a strong English background, and so then not even being able to communicate with like your next door neighbor or something. So with that, we have in our resiliency program that has the garden, we also have a women's sewing class that goes along with teaching women how to sew, but then also having it be a way to teach English. And also, again, just a way for people to embrace in community, and get to connect with others. And so that obviously looks a little different right now with COVID, but yeah, just a wide variety of programs that are making sure that they're serving the needs of individuals, not just when they first get here, but from years to come. And then also creating spaces where people are able to feel empowered and to do things on their own, while also connect with others and I don't know, just feel included and supported.
Yeah, I really love how you're there for them every step of the way. And I love the aspect of having a community garden and creating that supportive, but also really practical space for them. to add, like, what would you say are some ways that like we younger individuals can aid immigrants and refugees in our communities and raise awareness on the issues that they face?
I mean, first and foremost is anything of like, I studied political science in college, and so anything more politically minded of like writing to your representatives or going and attending, like I know in our state capitol there's a time where all of the representatives are hearing from people of like specific days that are geared towards like refugees and immigrants, and so like not being afraid to like call your senator, call your representative, and wanting to engage with more politically minded organizations that are doing education and outreach on that fact. So always a huge supporter of that, but more individually, I think just connecting with people or wanting to hear about people's experiences. And so anything from if there's someone at your school or someone in your community that like just moved in, or you can tell is like, hey, I don't know who they are, just connecting with people. And I think that's what everyone wants, is just to feel heard and included. So anywhere from that, but then also like if there is a agency that's doing any sort of work, working with newly arrived refugees, of just going to volunteer, or I know at World Relief Seattle, we have an internship program. And so that's a really great way to kind of have firsthand experience of working with like newly arrived participants, of getting to, I don't know, go and teach them English at an English class or take them to a doctor's appointment. And that's a really great way of having, like, I personally wasn't an intern, but I have friends that now work with me at World Relief that were, and that's a really great way to take you outside of the context in which you're so used to, and getting to engage with people and just hear about their experiences, and also seeing firsthand what it's like to go through the resettlement process. Like even before I applied for World Relief, I could have done as much like research in a book about refugee resettlement, but never fully understood what it all included until I was actually doing it. So yeah, I would just encourage to look up different organizations that are doing work around you, because I think people would be surprised to learn that there's a lot around the US, but then also not being afraid to get politically involved and sending out emails or doing different fundraisers for places around the US.
That's really great. Yeah, I definitely feel like our youth, especially like today in our current climate, are like getting more and more ready to become more politically involved. That's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
In an introspective perspective, when are you most proud when you see refugees integrate successfully into their communities?
I think having been at World Relief for 3 years now, it's really cool to see families or individuals that I worked with when I first started come back and be like, yeah, hi, like, do you remember me? And it's like, yeah, of course, like, how are you doing? And they're like, yeah, I'm actually like, I got this job. Or for ones that have been here for a little bit longer, it's really sweet to see them at the office and they're like, yeah, I'm applying for citizenship, or like, that's just so touching when you hear that. Or when a case that you've worked with then becomes a US tie for a new arrival case, and so you're calling them and you're like, oh my gosh, like, how are you doing? And so I think just seeing people from years to come, especially ones that you might have had like some really, really great connections with, of just hearing where they're at now, of like where they're living, what job they're doing, and just having those really sweet moments of like, especially having worked with someone when they first get here, to then see them 3, 4, 5 years down the line of just really thriving and knowing that they've overcome so many barriers to get there. I think it's just such a sweet moment.
Thank you for revealing your candid and wholesome experience.
How would you say the pandemic has impacted the immigrant and refugee community on a local but also global level? And what has World Relief Seattle done to help?
Yeah, wow, that's like a huge can of worms. Yeah, so I mean, on the local level, it was, I think everyone will fully remember like March 2020, where they were at when things really started to change. But it was so heartbreaking to see, especially people that had either gotten here like a month ago or 3 months ago or even a year ago, all of a sudden, we had a ton of people come back to our office wanting to talk to our employment team because everyone got laid off. A lot of our, so we have with our resettlement team, we have an asylee resettlement program. And so a lot of those are especially single guys that are here in the US. And a lot of the single individuals that we work with work in the like hotel industry. And that was one of the first places that started laying people off. And so it was just so heartbreaking to see people that had just been working for a week or for 2 weeks just have to come back and be like, I just got laid off. Like, can you get me another job? And then because of what was happening with COVID, every place was laying people off. And luckily this issue very quickly got changed, but something that was happening for the first month is we were seeing that people that had just arrived and had been working for less than a month didn't qualify for unemployment because you had to be working for a specific amount of time. And so then it was like, well, they just got laid off, but they didn't work enough to like receive unemployment benefits. So what are these, like, what do we do? And so luckily that was something that was changed, but I think like shed a huge light on some of the flaws within the system. So in that, but then also like my direct team, we had to change from doing direct service, which is heavily involved working with people, and switching that completely to be remote work. So anything from what used to be a home visit where you got to go into someone's house, check everything from the smoke detectors, showing them how to use the like oven and where everything is, making sure everything is safe, is now having to do that over Zoom. And that is luckily, that is slowly changing and getting better, but especially at the start of COVID we were still seeing some arrivals. And so then having to do like a really quick 180 to figure out how we were going to do that, and still having government requirements of specific services that have to get done within a specific time frame. But not only are you working with people, but you're working with people that have just traveled, and so having to work around people quarantining or getting COVID tested. And so just all of those challenges, and something that we're seeing right now too on a global scale is a lot, even though now we have a new administration that is very pro-immigrant, very pro-refugee, and also campaigned off of that, it's still kind of a slow start because a lot of the overseas like interviews that normally take place for refugees all halted last year because people weren't able to travel abroad. And so different interviews that there's like specific time frames on them of like how long they can last for, of like clearances, all of those expired and needing to get people back out there. But it is, as it's getting better within the US and hopefully soon globally, of like still a slow start of like having people be able to travel abroad to process applications and to do those interviews, and especially seeing that within what's called SIVs. So it's a special immigrant visa, and our office works heavily with SIVs coming from Afghanistan. So something that we're seeing right now is the presidential administration wants to pull out of Afghanistan by September 11th. But then you have this issue of there are thousands of Afghans that worked with the US government and should be receiving and were promised those visas, and they're going to get them. But that very quick, like only a few months away until the US government is completely gone. And then having the issue of those people that then worked with the US government, like their safety is in jeopardy. And so having to process those applications, but already seeing this backlog that filled up because of COVID. And so just a lot of different issues that pulled up, not only just because of COVID, but other extenuating circumstances. And things are getting better with like more vaccine rollout within the US, of organizations being able to open up their offices and work directly with clients now, not just like over the phone or going to someone's place and having them sign something and having to leave to do the home visit over Zoom. But yeah, it was just a huge challenge with people from anywhere from people losing jobs to having to distance ourselves when we're used to like engaging with people face to face. So it's something that I'm really proud of our office for how we handled it and like making it through. But yeah, it was a huge challenge. So
I'm glad to hear that you're able to start working with people more directly now. Would you say that there's like any area, whether it be like employment or food security or access to health resources, that you're like still struggling to provide aid in right now? Or would you say that it's slowly getting back to normal?
I think a huge one that we're seeing is rental assistance. So that's not for the people that are newly arrived refugees. That hasn't been a huge issue because they're able to be on programs that are more that provide assistance right away and then are geared towards helping them get employment. And employment has gotten a lot better, I would say. But the problem is people that had been here for a few months or a few years that then fell behind on rent. And what's been really cool out of COVID is we've seen a lot of different programs step up to provide more of a financial assistance. And so our office has gotten a variety of different grants or loans that are geared towards helping with rental assistance. That's something that I've been spearheading on our team. But it's so hard because there's only so much funding. And even if it's $20,000, $50,000, that can go so quick when you're working with people that are like, yeah, I'm 6 months behind on rent, or I'm 3 months behind on rent. And so helping in the way that you can of, hey, I can't provide you the 6 months that you need, but here's 2 months of rent. Well, still like that is so helpful, but also recognizing like I was talking with my manager the other day, like it's so hard of like, I wish we could just like give them the full amount they need because it's just so stressful to have the weight of like, I just owe thousands and thousands of dollars and like, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. And it was really great. There was an eviction moratorium in Washington state, which was so helpful, and we are seeing within our state's government of different programs to help people get out of it. But because just like with a lot of things with COVID, it was sort of a band-aid effect of like, there's this problem, we don't know what's happening. These are like very uncertain times. Let's go here of like an eviction moratorium was great, but what solutions do we have for people now that they were laid off and weren't able to pay rent for 6 months of like, okay, now that we're back where we're at, like, are we going to cancel debt? Are we going to provide like landlord mediation like teams to help you come up with a payment plan? Are we going to have like community agencies be given a lot of rental assistance and they can help people pay that way? So it might be because that's one that I'm personally working with, but I think that's one of the huge like lasting impacts that I see on people because of COVID.
Oh, thank you. That's really great to learn about.
We thank World Relief Seattle for this opportunity today, and thank you so much, Ashley, for joining us today and giving such insightful answers. The CLAIR Voices team has learned so much through this interview, and we really hope to be able to spread more awareness on what it is like to handle resettlement for the refugee community through the media in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. This is great, guys.